It was a chilly spring evening in Oklahoma City. The year was 1990. The city was bustling with its usual activity, people going about their daily lives, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. A passing driver spotted something lying by the side of a busy road. At first it seemed like a discarded piece of clothing or debris, but as the driver slowed down it became clear that it was something far more serious. It was a young woman. She was badly hurt. Her clothes were torn and she had visible injuries. The driver, shocked and horrified, immediately pulled over to help. Someone rushed to call for help. In those days mobile phones were not as common, so the driver had to flag down another car to use their phone. An ambulance arrived, sirens wailing, and took her to the hospital. The paramedics worked quickly, trying to stabilize her condition as they sped towards the emergency room. The woman, known as Tanya Hughes, clung to life. Her injuries were severe, and the medical team knew they had to act fast to save her. Sadly, her injuries were too severe. She died soon after. The hospital staff were heartbroken, having done everything they could to save her. Tanya left behind a mystery. Her sudden and violent death raised many questions. Who was she? Why was she out on that road? And most importantly, who would want to hurt her? Who would hurt this young woman? The community was in shock. Neighbors and friends couldn't believe that something so tragic could happen to someone they knew. She was only 20 years old, in the prime of her life, with dreams and aspirations that would now never be realized. Tanya had a little boy, Michael. He was the light of her life and she doted on him every chance she got. He was just 6 years old, too young to understand the full extent of what had happened but old enough to feel the loss of his mother deeply. Her husband, Clarence Hughes, was much older. Their relationship had always raised eyebrows, but Tanya seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to those who knew her. He seemed devastated by her death. Police started asking questions. They needed to piece together the events leading up to that fateful evening. They wanted to know if anyone would want to hurt Tanya. Friends and family were interviewed and everyone seemed to have the same question. Why Tanya? The police thought it might have been a hit and run. The location and nature of her injuries suggested that she could have been struck by a vehicle. But something didn't feel right. There were too many inconsistencies. Too many unanswered questions. Was there more to the story? The police began to dig deeper, looking into Tanya's past and her relationships. The investigation was just beginning. Little did they know it would take decades to uncover the truth about Tanya Hughes. The case would become a long and winding journey filled with twists and turns, as detectives worked tirelessly to bring justice for Tanya and her family. Clarence Hughes told the police that he and Tanya were happily married. He painted a picture of a perfect life filled with love and mutual respect. According to him, they were the ideal couple, always supporting each other through thick and thin. He emphasized how they were raising their son Michael together in a nurturing and loving home. Clarence described family outings, shared laughter, and the joy of watching their son grow. He said they were raising Michael together in a loving home, but beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, there were cracks that only those close to them could see. Some people who knew them weren't so sure about the happy facade. Neighbors and friends began to notice subtle signs that all was not well in the Hughes household. They whispered about things that didn't add up. There were hushed conversations about late-night arguments and unexplained absences. Clarence was a lot older than Tanya. He seemed controlling. His demeanor often came across as overbearing, and some felt he treated Tanya more like a possession than a partner. Tanya was a beautiful young woman. Her radiant smile and vibrant personality made her the center of attention wherever she went. She was full of life. Her laughter was infectious, and she had a way of making everyone around her feel special. But she seemed scared sometimes. There were moments when her cheerful facade would crack, revealing a glimpse of fear and anxiety. People noticed bruises on her arms. These marks were often brushed off as accidents, but they raised suspicions among those who cared about her. They wondered if Clarence was hurting her. The whispers grew louder, and the concern for Tanya's well-being became more pronounced. No one knew for sure what was happening behind closed doors. The Hughes home, once a symbol of happiness, now seemed shrouded in mystery and fear. But the whispers grew louder after Tanya's death. Something wasn't right. The suddenness of her passing left many unanswered questions and a community in shock. The police continued to investigate. They combed through every detail looking for clues that might explain the tragic event. They talked to more people who knew Tanya and Clarence. Each interview brought new insights but also more questions. They hoped someone would come forward with information. The community's silence was a barrier they needed to break through. They needed a break in the case. The truth was out there, hidden among the whispers and shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Years passed. The case went cold. The disappearance of Tanya Hughes had become a distant memory for many, a tragic story that seemed destined to remain unsolved. The community had moved on, and the police had no new leads. It was as if Tanya had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only sorrow and unanswered questions. Then, one day, a mysterious photo surfaced. It arrived in an unmarked envelope, left on the doorstep of a local newspaper office. The photograph was old and faded, but it was clear enough to make out the faces. It showed Clarence Hughes with a little girl. The man was smiling, holding the girl on his lap. The image was hauntingly familiar to those who remembered the case. The girl looked a lot like Tanya, her eyes, her expression, everything about her seemed to echo the missing girl. It was as if the past had come back to life in that single photograph. The photo ended up in the hands of an investigative journalist named Matt Birkbeck. Matt was known for his tenacity and his ability to uncover hidden truths. He had a reputation for digging deep, for never letting go of a story until he had all the answers. Matt had been interested in Tanya's case for a long time. He had followed every lead, read every article, and spoken to everyone who might know something. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of a darker story lurking beneath the surface. He had heard the rumors, stories of secrets and lies, of things that didn't add up. He knew there was more to the story than what had been reported. He suspected there was more to the story. The photograph was a new piece of the puzzle, a clue that could lead to the truth. Matt felt a surge of determination. He knew he had to follow this lead, no matter where it took him. When Matt saw the photo, he knew he had to find out who the little girl was. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the break he had been waiting for. The resemblance to Tanya was too strong to ignore. He had a hunch it was connected to Tanya. Matt started digging. He went through old documents, searching for any connection, any clue that might link the girl in the photo to the missing Tanya. He tracked down old friends of Tanya and Clarence. He spoke to anyone who might have known them, hoping to find someone who could recognize the girl in the photo. He looked through public records, birth certificates, school records, anything that might give him a lead. He was relentless in his search. He spent hours in libraries, poring over old newspapers. He read every article about Tanya's disappearance, looking for any detail he might have missed. Matt was determined to uncover the truth. He knew that the photograph was a key piece of evidence, something that could finally bring answers to the questions that had haunted so many for so long. The photo had given him a new lead. It was a glimmer of hope in a case that had seemed hopeless for so long. It was the break he needed to crack the case wide open. Matt felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was closer than ever to finding out the truth. What he would find would shock everyone. The truth was out there, and Matt was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. Matt Birkbeck's investigation was like untangling a complicated knot. Every time he thought he was close to the answer, he found more lies. He discovered that Clarence Hughes wasn't his real name. Clarence had been on the run from the law for years. He had a long history of deception and violence. Matt found out that Clarence had been married before. His previous wife had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Could Clarence have harmed her too? Matt also learned that Clarence was a master manipulator. He was good at making people believe his lies. He had fooled Tanya completely. Matt was starting to piece together a terrifying picture. Clarence Hughes was not the man he pretended to be. He was a dangerous criminal who was hiding a dark past. As Matt dug deeper, he uncovered a horrifying truth. Clarence Hughes was connected to a sinister place called the Franklin cover-up scandal. This involved powerful people in high places. They were involved in terrible crimes against children. Matt found evidence that Clarence had taken Tanya to these places. He had used her and abused her for his own sick purposes. The little girl in the photo was Tanya's daughter. Clarence had taken her away from Tanya years earlier. Matt was horrified by what he was discovering. He realized that Tanya had been trapped in a nightmare. She had been living with a monster. Matt Birkbeck was finally able to piece together Tanya's real story. Her real name was Sharon Marshall. She had grown up with a loving family, but her life was tragically turned upside down when she met Clarence. He was much older and easily manipulated her. He took her away from her family and friends. He gave her a new name and a new identity. He controlled her every move. Clarence abused Sharon physically, emotionally, and sexually. He forced her to work as an exotic dancer. He even made her dye her hair and change her appearance to keep her hidden. Sharon lived in constant fear of Clarence. She was desperate to escape his clutches, but she was terrified for her life and the life of her daughter. Matt Birkbeck knew he had to get justice for Sharon. He contacted the authorities with his findings. The police reopened the case. They were finally able to track down Clarence Hughes. He was living under another assumed identity. In 2002, Clarence Hughes was arrested and charged with Sharon's murder. He was also charged with other crimes, including kidnapping and child abuse. The trial was long and difficult, but in the end, justice was served. Clarence Hughes was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it took over a decade, Sharon's story finally came to light. In 2022, Netflix released a documentary called Girl in the Picture. It tells the heartbreaking story of Sharon Marshall and the tireless investigation by Matt Birkbeck. The documentary brought Sharon's case to a global audience. It shocked and horrified viewers around the world. People were outraged by the injustice that Sharon had suffered. They were also inspired by Matt Birkbeck's determination to uncover the truth. Girl in the Picture became one of the most watched documentaries on Netflix. It sparked important conversations about domestic violence, child abuse, and the importance of speaking out against injustice. Sharon Marshall's story is a tragedy, but it is also a story of courage and resilience. Despite the horrors she endured, Sharon never gave up hope. She fought to protect her daughter. She tried to escape her abuser. Even in death, Sharon's spirit lived on. Her story inspired countless people to fight for justice. Matt Birkbeck's book and the Netflix documentary helped to ensure that Sharon would never be forgotten. They also served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times there is always hope. Sharon's legacy continues to inspire people to speak out against injustice and to fight for a world where everyone can live free from fear.
Gray Man is an inhuman creature that is said to haunt the summit and passes of the second highest peak in Scotland, Ben Macdui. In the native Scottish tongue, the creature is known as Am Fear Lieth More. Like the Yeti of the Himalayas and Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, of the American Pacific Northwest, the Big Gray Man has been seen by few eyewitnesses. What makes the Big Gray Man particularly frightening is that his physical characteristics don't resemble that of a bear, and thus sightings can't be dismissed as bear sightings. Those who have seen the Big Gray Man describe it as extremely tall, over 10 feet, and human-like, with short hair, broad shoulders, and long arms. Nearly all reports of sightings include the sound of gravel crunching beneath footfalls. Scientists haven't been able to come up with an explanation for the sightings and the accompanying sounds, although psychologists have proposed that those who have supposedly seen and heard the Big Gray Man have been in a state of physical and mental anguish brought on by exhaustion and isolation. For now, the Big Gray Man remains a mystery, but if you go to Scotland, let us know if you run into the Big Gray Man. Check out some urban legends that actually turned out to be true.
Jeanette De Palma, born on August 3, 1956, was an American teenager who is believed to have been murdered sometime on or around August 7, 1972, in Springfield Township, Union County, New Jersey, United States. Her body was discovered the following month on a cliff, known to locals as the Devil's Teeth, located in Springfield's Hoodell Quarry. The events of her death were subject to sensationalist coverage in local media for rumored connections to alleged occult activity in the area. The case, currently unsolved, has become a matter of significant controversy, due in part to coverage in Weird NJ magazine and in the 2015 book Death on the Devil's Teeth, which proposed several theories but no firm conclusions. In an updated story from September 2024, Weird NJ magazine stated they were confident that there was no occult activity involved in her death, after reviewing the crime scene photographs. The mystery is analyzed in Hulu's Out There Crimes of the Paranormal, Episode 4, Jersey Witch Hunt, which features De Palma's case with the organization Justice for Jeanette. The organization Justice for Jeanette De Palma is dedicated to keeping her memory alive. the organizers continue to look for clues. On the afternoon of Monday, August 7, 1972, 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma left her home on Clearview Road in Springfield Township, Union County, New Jersey, telling her mother that she was going to take a train to a friend's house. When she did not arrive at her friend's house or return later that evening, her parents filed a missing person report with the Springfield Police Department the following day. 6 weeks later, on September 19th, De Palma's remains were found atop a cliff inside of Springfield's Hoodile Quarry after a local dog brought her decomposing right forearm and hand back to its owner. According to several witnesses at the scene, De Palma's skeletal remains were surrounded by a series of strange and possibly occult objects. Descriptions vary, but the most commonly agreed upon account states that the remains were found inside a coffin-shaped perimeter of fallen branches and logs, and inside this perimeter were several small makeshift wooden crosses. Some Springfield residents later claimed that De Palma's remains were found lying on a pentagram, surrounded by mutilated animal remains. Law enforcement authorities have denied that this was true. Further controversy was aroused when it was discovered that the body had been found on a cliff known to locals for several decades as the Devil's Teeth. The Springfield Police Department began an investigation of De Palma's death after an autopsy could not reveal a cause of death. Her remains and clothing showed no evidence of bone fractures, bullet wounds, or knife strikes. No drug paraphernalia was found on or around the body. For undisclosed reasons, the coroner suspected that strangulation was the cause of death, leading the Union County Prosecutor's Office to treat the case as an unsolved homicide. The coroner also discovered an unusually high amount of lead in the remains, but no explanation was found for this occurrence either. Early in the investigation, Springfield police received a tip regarding a homeless man living in the woods near the quarry. This man was known to locals simply as Red, and it was alleged that he fled his campsite in the woods shortly after De Palma went missing. While this lead initially looked promising, the Union County Prosecutor's Office ultimately decided that Red had nothing to do with De Palma's death. Investigators continued to attempt to find leads, but due to a lack of tips from the public, along with inconsistent stories told to the police by her family, friends, and peers, the case eventually went cold. Despite rumors and innuendo offered by Springfield police regarding De Palma possibly dying as the result of a drug overdose, no drug paraphernalia was found on, near, or around her body, and she was not known by friends or family to have used any recreational or prescription drugs other than occasionally smoking marijuana socially. De Palma's autopsy report makes no mention of the possibility of a drug overdose, and medical examiner Bernard Ehrenberg went on record stating he suspected strangulation as he could not rule it out during the autopsy of her remains. Around 2 weeks after the discovery of De Palma's remains, several newspapers, including the Newark Star-Ledger and the New York Daily News, began reporting that she may have been the victim of an occult sacrifice carried out either by Satanists or by a local coven of witches who operated inside nearby Watchung Reservation. This coverage was spurred by reports that the body had been found surrounded by strange objects and by the theories of James Tate, the pastor of the De Palma family's Assemblies of God Church. Rumors about the case set off a panic in several Union County communities, which were still recovering from the shock of the John List murders only 10 months earlier. During the spring of 2021, convicted New Jersey serial killer Richard Cottingham, also known as the Torso Killer, made a series of written statements to journalist Jesse P. Pollack, alluding to him having possibly abducted and killed De Palma while she was hitchhiking. Pollack forwarded this correspondence to the Union County Prosecutor's Office, after Cottingham agreed to speak with investigators if they would meet with him. Cottingham's statements regarding Jeanette's murder were later printed in the 2022 updated and revised edition of Death on the Devil's Teeth. As of December 2022, No updates have been given by law enforcement.
The story of how two small children with green skin arrived in the Suffolk village of Woolpit in the 12th century. 5-minute read. The title of this story may sound immediately implausible to the cynics amongst you, but surprisingly, this is one tale of folklore which is probably founded on some basis of truth. The legend of the Green Children of Woolpit starts during the reign of King Stephen, in a rather tumultuous time in England's history called the Anarchy in the mid-12th century. Woolpit, or in Old English, Wolfpit, is an ancient village in Suffolk named after, as one might gather from its name, an old pit for catching wolves. Next to this wolf pit in around 1150, a group of villagers came across two young children with green skin, apparently speaking gibberish and acting nervously. According to writings at the time by Ralph of Coggeshall, the children were subsequently taken to the nearby home of Sir Richard de Calne, where he offered them food, but they repeatedly refused to eat. This continued for some days, until the children came across some green beans in Richard de Calne's garden, which they ate straight out of the ground. It is thought that the children lived with Richard de Calne for some years, where he was able to slowly convert them over to normal food. According to the writings of the day, this change in diet led to the children losing their green complexion. The children also slowly learnt to speak English, and once fluent were asked where they had come from and why their skin was once green. They replied with, "We are inhabitants of the land of St. Martin, who is regarded with peculiar veneration in the country which gave us birth. We are ignorant of how we arrived here. We only remember this, that on a certain day when we were feeding our father's flocks in the fields, we heard a great sound, such as we are now accustomed to hear at St. Edmund's, when the bells are chiming. And whilst listening to the sound in admiration, we became on a sudden, as it were, entranced, and found ourselves among you in the fields where you were reaping. The sun does not rise upon our countrymen. Our land is little cheered by its beams. We are contented with that twilight which among you precedes the sunrise or follows the sunset. Moreover, a certain luminous country is seen, not far distant from ours, and divided from it by a very considerable river." Shortly after this revelation, Richard de Calne took the children to be baptized in a local church. However, the boy died soon afterwards through an unknown illness. The girl, later known as Agnes, continued to work for Richard de Calne for many years before marrying the Archdeacon of Ely, Richard Barr. According to one report, the pair had at least one child. So who were the Green Children of Woolpit? The most likely explanation for the Green Children of Woolpit is that they were the descendants of Flemish immigrants who had been persecuted and possibly killed by King Stephen or, perhaps, King Henry II. Lost, confused, and without their parents, the children could have ended up at Woolpit speaking only their native tongue of Flemish, perhaps explaining how the villagers thought that they were speaking gibberish. Furthermore, the green tint to the children's skin could be explained by malnourishment or, more specifically, green sickness. This theory is supported by the fact that their skin reverted to a normal color once Richard de Calne had converted them over to eating real food. Personally, we like to side with the more romantic theory that these children arrived from an underground world where the native inhabitants are all green.
The Atlas vampire was an unknown assailant who committed the unsolved vampire murder in Stockholm, Sweden. On May 4, 1932, a 31-year-old prostitute named Lily Lindestrom was found murdered in her small apartment in the Atlas area of Stockholm near St. Eriksplan. On May 4, 1932, a 31-year-old prostitute named Lily Lindestrom was found murdered in her small apartment in the Atlas area of Stockholm near Sankt Eriksplan. She had been dead for 2 to 3 days before police broke into her apartment. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Lily was found completely naked and face down on her bed. According to reports, sexual activity had taken place, with a condom found to be protruding from her anus. The detectives noted that a gravy ladle was found at the scene, and on further inspection of the body, they realized her body had been drained of all of her blood. Police suspected the implement was used by the perpetrator to drink Lily's blood. Various clients fell under suspicion, but after a lengthy investigation, none were charged with her murder. The murder remains unsolved. Some of history's most depraved murderers have had a vampire-like fascination with blood. Some even believed they were an immortal bloodsucker. These killers include Friedrich Heinrich Karl Fritz Haarmann, the Vampire of Hanover, Richard Trenton Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento, and Marcelo Costa de Andrade, the Vampire of Niterói. One of history's most infamous real-life vampires was Peter Kürten, known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, due to the brutality of his crimes and his obsession with blood. Kürten was executed on July 2, 1931, for the murder of 9 people and the attempted murder of 7 others. One of history's most infamous real-life vampires was Peter Kürten, known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, due to the brutality of his crimes and his obsession with blood. Kürten was executed on July 2, 1931, for the murder of 9 people and the attempted murder of 7 others. Scene 2. Kürten's last words. Before he walked to the guillotine, he reportedly asked the prison psychiatrist, "After my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." This literal bloodlust displayed by Kürten and other killers is known as clinical vampirism, or Renfield syndrome. Although psychiatrists have written about the behaviors associated with clinical vampirism since the 19th century, the disorder received notoriety in 1992 after the publication of Richard Knoll's Vampires, Werewolves, and Demons 20th Century Reports in the Psychiatric Literature. As Knoll was writing this book, the clinical psychologist realized that patients with clinical vampirism acted in ways similar to R.M. Renfield. Renfield was a character in Bram Stoker's Dracula, who is a patient at a lunatic asylum and under the influence of the famous vampire. He jokingly renamed the disorder Renfield syndrome as a play on DSM speak. The term soon went viral as it was popularized by news articles and documentaries. One of my favorite real-life vampire murders is the Atlas vampire. This killer struck Stockholm more than 85 years ago, and the case is still unsolved. On May 4, 1932, a woman named Minnie went to the Stockholm police because she had not heard from her friend, Lily Lindestrom, for 4 days. This was unusual because the friends lived in the same building, in the Atlas neighborhood of Stockholm, and looked after each other. On May 4, 1932, a woman named Minnie went to the Stockholm police because she had not heard from her friend, Lily Lindestrom, for 4 days. This was unusual because the friends lived in the same building, in the Atlas neighborhood of Stockholm, and looked after each other. Scene 2. The Discovery. When police went to Lily's apartment for a welfare check, they found she had been dead for a few days. The body of the 32-year-old was laying on her left side on top of an ottoman. Her head rested on her left arm. Blood dripped onto the floor from a large wound on the right side of her head. In the days after the discovery of Lily's body, investigators questioned her friends and neighbors in order to piece together her movements and hopefully identify a suspect. On the evening of April 30, 1932, Lily paid her rent, then went to her apartment to meet a client. Lily was a sex worker who frequently met her clients in her home. On the evening of April 30, 1932, Lily paid her rent, then went to her apartment to meet a client. Lily was a sex worker who frequently met her clients in her home. Unfortunately, police never found out who this person was. Minnie told investigators that Lily knocked on her door that night to borrow a condom, then returned a short while later for a second one when the first condom broke. This was the last time Lily was seen alive. Minnie checked on her friend the next day, but she did not answer the door. She just assumed Lily was out celebrating Walpurgis Night, a sort of spring celebration observed on May 1st and known for its carnival-like atmosphere. She decided to go to the cops when she did not hear from Lily the next few days. Because Lily's death was considered suspicious, investigators called on a physician to do an autopsy. The physician determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The fatal wound was on the right side of her head that extended from her temple to her neck. The physician determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The fatal wound was on the right side of her head that extended from her temple to her neck. It was thought that the killer struck her from behind with a heavy, round object, like a pipe. It was during this examination that the physician found one of the borrowed condoms between her legs. Police assumed the killer tasted some of Lily's blood because there was a blood-covered ladle in the kitchen sink. Because of this, the murderer became known as the Atlas Vampire. The suspect was named for the neighborhood in which the attack occurred, and the murderers suspected sanguine compulsion. I've read some articles and heard some podcasts report that the Atlas Vampire drained Lily's body of most or all of her blood, but I have not been able to verify that detail in the few English articles I read. I also did not find evidence of blood draining in the Swedish articles. However, I relied on Google Translate for this portion of my research, which is probably not the most reliable method of translation. I reached out to the Stockholm Police Museum, which stores the evidence for this case, and asked them if the killer drained the blood from Lily's body. As of publication of this blog post, I have not heard back. The Stockholm police searched Lily's apartment and the area surrounding the building. Her second-floor apartment was neat and showed no signs of a struggle. The Stockholm police searched Lily's apartment and the area surrounding the building. Her second-floor apartment was neat and showed no signs of a struggle. The clothes she wore the night of her murder were neatly folded on a chair. Alvar Zetterquist, an investigator who worked on the case, wrote a few years afterward that the murderer left no evidence behind, no fingerprints, emptied glass, no hairs, or cigarettes. They believed the killer brought the murder weapon with him and took it when he left. Investigators collected evidence from Lily's body, including hair and nail clippings. The Stockholm Police Museum has these samples, along with the wrappers from the condoms she borrowed from her friend, and crime scene drawings. Police never charged anyone for the murder of Lily Lindestrom, and the case eventually went cold.
February 11th, 1996, dawned like any other day. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the quiet neighborhood. Inside their cozy home, Kay Fisher was starting her day. The smell of coffee filled the air, a familiar and comforting aroma. Kay went about her usual routine, unaware that this ordinary morning was about to take a very strange turn. Kay's husband, Mike Fletcher, was already awake, reading the newspaper in the living room. The gentle chirping of birds outside provided a peaceful backdrop to the start of their day. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, the kind of ordinary moment that fades into the background of memory. But this particular morning, the mundane would collide with the inexplicable. Kay joined Mike in the living room, her warm smile a familiar and welcome sight. They chatted about their plans for the day, their voices a comforting murmur in the quiet house. Nothing seemed amiss. There was no sign, no premonition, of the strange event that was about to unfold. In a heartbeat, their ordinary morning would be irrevocably altered, leaving them grappling with an experience that defied explanation. As Kay sat down next to Mike, she felt a strange sensation, a sudden warmth that seemed to originate from her chest. It felt like her sweater was on fire. Alarmed, she jumped up, brushing at her chest frantically. Mike, equally startled, leaped to his feet, his eyes wide with concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice edged with worry. "I don't know," Kay stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "It felt like my sweater was on fire." She examined her clothing, expecting to see flames or at least scorch marks. But there was nothing. Her sweater was untouched. Mike, his brow furrowed with concern, inspected her sweater closely. He ran his hands over the fabric, searching for any sign of heat or burning. But his search, like hers, yielded nothing. There was no heat, no smell of smoke, no trace of fire. Yet Kay was adamant. She had felt the unmistakable sensation of heat against her skin. Confused and more than a little frightened, Kay and Mike began a thorough search of the living room. They checked for any potential sources of heat, a stray ember from the fireplace, a malfunctioning electrical outlet, anything that could explain the sudden, intense warmth Kay had felt. But their search proved fruitless. The fireplace was cold, the electrical outlets were functioning normally, and there was no logical explanation for the strange event that had just transpired. The air hung heavy with unanswered questions. What had Kay experienced? Where had that sudden intense heat come from, and why wasn't there any evidence of it? It was as if the laws of physics had taken a brief holiday, leaving behind a residue of confusion and fear. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that unsettling morning lingered. Kay and Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed something truly inexplicable. They consulted doctors, electricians, even fire experts, hoping for a rational explanation, a scientific basis for the impossible. But their efforts were met with shrugs, puzzled expressions, and a resounding silence when it came to concrete answers. The lack of any physical evidence made Kay's experience all the more baffling. There were no burns on her skin, no scorch marks on her clothing, no trace of smoke in the air. It was as if the heat she had felt existed only in her perception, a phantom sensation with no basis in reality. The absence of any rational explanation left Kay and Mike grappling with the unknown. Had their senses deceived them? Had they imagined the whole thing? Or had they stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, a phenomenon that defied the boundaries of scientific understanding? The mystery of that February morning settled over them like a shroud, a constant reminder of the limitations of human knowledge. They were left to navigate a world where the impossible had seemingly become possible, where the line between reality and the unexplainable had blurred. And in the absence of answers, they held on to the hope that one day, the truth of what Kay had experienced would be revealed. Section 5. A History of Spontaneous Combustion. Kay's experience, while unsettling, was not entirely unique. Throughout history, there have been numerous accounts of what has come to be known as spontaneous human combustion, the alleged phenomenon of a human body catching fire, seemingly without an external source of ignition. One of the earliest recorded cases dates back to the 17th century, when a Danish nobleman, Polonius Vorstius, is said to have burst into flames after consuming a large amount of brandy. Since then, hundreds of cases have been reported worldwide, each more bizarre and terrifying than the last. There's the case of Mary Reeser, a 67-year-old widow from St. Petersburg, Florida, who was found reduced to a pile of ashes in her apartment in 1951. The only remnants of her were a shrunken skull and a foot wearing a slipper. The rest of her body, along with the chair she was sitting in, had been consumed by an intense heat that left the rest of her apartment relatively unscathed. These accounts, often shrouded in mystery and fueled by speculation, paint a grim picture. Victims found reduced to ashes, their surroundings largely untouched by fire. The lack of a clear ignition source, coupled with the often localized nature of the burns, has led to a plethora of theories, ranging from the scientific to the downright bizarre. Some speculate that SHC is the result of a buildup of methane gas in the digestive system, ignited by some unknown internal spark. Others point to static electricity ball lightning, or even divine intervention as possible explanations. However, none of these theories have been scientifically proven. The medical community largely dismisses SHC as a genuine phenomenon, attributing most cases to the wick effect. This theory posits that the victim's clothing acts as a wick, soaked in melted body fat, allowing the body to slowly burn over an extended period, much like a candle. While the wick effect can explain some of the characteristics of SHC, it fails to account for the speed and intensity of the combustion in some cases, as well as the lack of damage to the surrounding environment. The scientific community, while intrigued by the phenomenon, remains skeptical. The lack of conclusive evidence, coupled with the often sensationalized nature of the reports, has made SHC a subject of much debate but little scientific progress. Critics argue that many alleged SHC cases can be attributed to external sources of ignition, such as cigarettes, candles, or faulty electrical appliances that were overlooked or destroyed in the fire. They also point to the fact that the human body is largely composed of water and is naturally resistant to combustion. Despite the lack of scientific consensus, SHC continues to capture the public imagination, fueled by its presence in popular culture, from Charles Dickens' Bleak House to The X-Files. The idea that our bodies could spontaneously combust, a fiery demise seemingly out of thin air, taps into our primal fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable. While science searches for answers, the mystery of SHC endures. Kay Fisher's experience, though lacking the devastating consequences of other alleged cases, serves as a stark reminder of the limits of our understanding of the natural world. Her story, like those of countless others who claim to have experienced this unexplained phenomenon, leaves us with more questions than answers. Was Kay's experience a genuine case of SHC, a fleeting brush with a force beyond our comprehension? Or was it simply a trick of perception, a momentary glitch in the matrix of our reality? The answer, like the smoke that seemed to emanate from her body that fateful morning, remains elusive. The human mind, hardwired to seek patterns and explanations, struggles to make sense of experiences that defy logic and reason. In the absence of concrete answers, we are left to grapple with the unknown, to confront the possibility that there are forces at work in the universe that we may never fully understand. The story of Kay Fisher and the countless others who claim to have experienced spontaneous human combustion stands as a testament to the enduring power of the unexplained. It serves as a reminder that for all our scientific advancements, there are still mysteries that elude our grasp, phenomena that challenge our understanding of the world and our place in it. While the scientific community continues to search for a definitive explanation for SHC, the phenomenon remains a source of fascination and speculation. It is a stark reminder that we live in a world where the impossible may not be so impossible after all, where the boundaries of our reality are constantly being tested and redefined. And perhaps in the end it is the mystery itself, the unanswered questions that continue to captivate us, fueling our imaginations and reminding us that there is still so much we don't know about the universe and our place within it. Disclaimer. It is important to note that spontaneous human combustion is not a scientifically proven phenomenon, and remains a topic of debate. The information presented here should not be interpreted as definitive proof of SHC, but rather as an exploration of an unexplained event, and the various theories surrounding it.